Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to the Town Hall for the Live Theater community. I'm so excited to have you here today. I want to introduce, first and foremost, co-moderator and co-host of our show. This is Mandy Jo John. Everybody say, hey, Mandy Jo. How you doing, Mandy Jo?
Hi, happy to be back for round two.
Good.
And yes, and of course, everyone, this is my co-host, Gabrielle Jackson, the founder and executive director of the Joy Jackson Initiative, and the mother of the assessment, we shall say.
Yes, that's my baby. I am so glad that we're here. Mandy Jo, I love the work that you're doing with your organization. Mandy Jo is the founder and executive director of Black Theater Girl Magic. BTGM has been such an incredible partner in this work, and I'm so glad. Can you tell us a little bit about BTGM, Mandy Jo, and the work that you do?
Of course. So Black Theater Girl Magic started as a small grassroots organization network of Black and brown women in the performing arts with any discipline. And we grew in size over the years, and finally, in the last year or so, we became an advocacy group, not necessarily around the events that led to the murder of George Floyd, but we were already in that position. So once that happened, we, sprang into action, and BTGM's advocacy kind of came to be. And so now we are a nonprofit organization with over 1,700 members, all Black and brown women from all over the world, and getting stronger every day.
Excellent. That's so amazing. Thank you so much, Mandy Jo. Also, wanted to make sure that we talk a little bit about the folks who will be joining us for this amazing town hall. First and foremost, we are joined today by two incredible interpreters, and I am so excited to have them here with us today. Accessibility is so important to both of our organizations, right? And I'm just so excited that we have folks here. And beneath us, you'll see Dresden Lamar. Dresden is wearing a black shirt and is in front of a white background. And Dresden will be interpreting for us today for the first half. We're also joined by Williams, who we'll meet later on in the stream. And we'll be sure to make sure that we give a little visual description of Ruby when we see her as well.
Gabby, we should do our visual descriptions as well.
Absolutely. I'm Gabrielle Jackson. My pronouns are she and her. I am coming to you today from of the Tacoma land that is protected by the Confederate tribes of the Siletz Indians. And I am so excited and grateful to be a guest on this land today. And I am wearing a blue collared shirt with white stripes. And I have a long braided ponytail, and I am in front of pizza artwork and some curtains.
Well, my name is Mandy Jo. My pronouns are she, her. I am broadcasting from the ancestral lands of the Seminole tribes, and I am wearing a green shirt with puffy sleeves. I am a medium-toned black skin woman with medium skin-toned black woman with curly hair, and I am in front of family photographs and on a white wall.
Amazing. Fantastic. Awesome. So let's get into it. I'm so excited to get started, Mandy Jo. Are you stoked?
Yes, I'm very excited. Last time we really had some incredible breakthroughs, and the data was just so fascinating. So I'm excited to dig into the second round of assessment data and see, what we're dealing with.
Amazing. Excited because this is, as you said, my baby, so I can't wait to talk about it and see what we've got. So without further ado, I would like to start with our introductions for our panelists. Okay, let's get into it. So our first panelist is Jenna Ellser. And Jenna Ellser is joining us from Glow Lyric Theater. Glow Lyric Theater is a vocal arts company producing opera and musical theater in direct response to the social and political climate of South Carolina. Their season welcomes 100 artists and 5,000 audience members to participate in thought-provoking productions designed to connect with community action. Jenna, we are so excited to have you.
To be here. I am Jenna Ellser. I use she, her pronouns, and I am currently coming to you from the stolen land of the Cherokee and Catawba people. I am a white woman. I have blonde hair, and I'm wearing a black and floral shirt, and I'm sitting in front of a couch, and I have 2 pictures of flowers hanging behind me. Happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jenna. So glad you're here with us today.
Thank you. All right, next up, we have Evan Hoffman. Evan is the producing artistic director of Next Stop Theater Company in Herndon, Virginia. More importantly, he is a devoted husband and the proud father of 3 ridiculously adorable children. In his spare time, he is also a professional actor and director who has worked extensively in the DC area, as well as nationally and internationally. He received his bachelor's degree in theater from the College of William and Mary. In 2009, Evan was named an International Fellow at Shakespeare's Globe in London. Hi, Evan.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Evan Hoffman. My pronouns are he, him. And I am coming to you from the ancestral lands of the Manahoac tribe here in Northern Virginia. And I am currently wearing a blue and white striped collared shirt and sitting in front of white and green curtains. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much. We're
Thank you for being here.
Yes. Our next panelist is Vanessa Knowles. Vanessa Knowles is the executive director at Free to Be Me Performance Academy and directs Dynamics Performance Troupe, where my little sister, the Joy Jackson, enjoys her performances. Though Free is a newer organization, Vanessa has been working in the industry for over 20 years as a performer, creator, and educator. Free is committed to creating a safe space for all people to be the best version of themselves. And they are so honored to take part in the beta testing for the JJS. Thank you. And they are learning and will continue to learn and work indefinitely. Please welcome Vanessa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me.
Hi,
here.
Vanessa.
Hi.
My name is Vanessa Knowles, and I use she, her pronouns. I am joining you here today from the land of the Tongva and the Keech. And I am a white female. I have light brown hair, and I'm wearing a gray sweatshirt, and my background is white.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Vanessa. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Melissa Bernstein. Founded in 2013, the mission of Newton Theater Company is to create excellent works of art in new ways. Their productions include original stagings of contemporary and classical literature, new plays, and devised pieces with a focus on women's voices. Their goal is to promote community through artistic expression. Eager to partner with other local nonprofit organizations, they choose meaningful material that fosters civically engaged audiences. Welcome, Melissa.
Hello.
Hi, Melissa. Hi. So excited to have you.
Oh, nice to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Bernstein. My pronouns are she, hers. I'm coming to you from the stolen lands of the Pawtucket tribe. I'm a white woman in her 50s with curly hair, and I'm sitting in a room that has a big window behind me and a blue couch.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.
Wow, everyone, we are all met. I'm so excited, more thrilled for us to dive into these conversations. I am so glad to have you all here and so incredibly heartened by the conversations that we've had over the last few weeks over the course of the assessment. Before we really get into every single thing, because we are going to get into every single thing, I just wanted to take a moment and, talk about the assessment, what work that you all have done is, and what it is, what this, looks like, and how Mandy Jo and I came into partnership. And so let's start with, I think we should start with that, Mandy Jo, how we kind of came into being able to partner together and being able to work well together.
Well, it started out as, two separate organizations on two different coasts. And, BTGM's work is solely one of our mission. Our mission statement is sorry, I just forgot my own mission statement. Our mission statement is to create a more equitable and racially just theater industry and entertainment industry for Black and Brown women. And the way we're accomplishing that is through a myriad of ways, one of which being elevating the important anti-racism work being done by Black women-led organizations. And with that vision in mind, we were connected through a mutual friend who said, hey, I know a Black women-led organization. And, we kind of just clicked from there. I immediately saw the value in what the assessment is and what its potential could be. So, we just said, how can we help? How can we put our weight behind what the Joy Jackson Initiative is doing? And it's grown from there.
And I gotta say, help you did, because this assessment has been a large undertaking, a huge work. As everybody who's here, I see you all nodding along with the huge work portion. It's been a large undertaking, and for me, it's been such an incredible journey. So what we've done here with the assessment is found a way to measure the structural of organizations to support BIPOC folks that they invite into their spaces. So the way that we're doing that is through hard data, right? But we're also asking questions about, what people are in their organizations, their policies and practices, their ideals and the culture of their organizations, and how those things mold together. And so the folks that you see below here are part of our second beta cohort. The cohort happened at the beginning of the summer, a much smaller, much more bones assessment that was taken then, but then we had another round of peer review and professional review for BIPOC folks to add in their needs and their wants and their requimands, as I'm calling them. It's a mix between requests and demands. And we took the requests and demands from We See You White American Theater to all the students from colleges and universities across the country, and we put them into one, and we built this beautiful assessment, and it's been a really incredible time. I'm super excited to get into this, and I wanted to just pose a question to all of the panelists today and just ask just about what your experience with the assessment was. How did you, I know we all kind of chatted about this a little bit, but I would love to know what your experience with the assessment was. And we can actually I would love to start with Vanessa on that question.
All right. I would have to say that, first of all, I don't think I really had a great understanding of exactly what I was getting into, in the sense that there was such an incredible amount of care and work that went into this. And so I first just want to thank you, Gabby, for creating this. I cannot begin to explain in words just what this is. You guys have to see it. I mean, it is so much. For me personally, I found it to be an incredibly reflective experience for myself. But more importantly, as a performer, it really kind of like highlighted some of my privilege. I don't perform much anymore, but 20 years ago when there were contracts and tours, I would have never thought to even think about some of the things that I looked at in the assessment. And that really showed me that there's quite a bit of that sort of privilege that I, never really even considered. As an educator, I was so impressed with just all of the areas that were brought to light and the parts that it really showed us and as an organization where we could do better just on all sides of it, not even just what's happening in the classroom, but what's happening behind the scenes, and how we can make that more known in our community and in our culture at my company and organization.
Amazing. That's incredible. I'm so glad that
was. If I may, to speak to the work that's gone into the assessment, yes, it's largely the brainchild of Gabby, but she hasn't been producing this in a vacuum. Once the assessment was kind of created in its first form, she then gathered dozens, if not dozens upon dozens of other Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are in the field, particularly actors, producers, directors, technical designers, costume designers, artistic directors, producers, and just said, what is your experience with this? Read this document. Is it accurate? Are these the right questions? And we've spent hours of conversation around these documents and around these questions, making sure that the wording is intentional, making sure that the focus is intentional. And so, when we talk about how much work Gabby has put into this document, it's so many hours of her work, but also just the work and the labor and the experiences and the stories of dozens of Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are in the arts. So I think that's important to mention.
Absolutely.
Truly. And I gotta say too that the team over here at JJI has been such an incredible, has been just so incredible and has provided not only like support emotionally, but also like looking at the assessment and helping to refine the from our BIPOC folks. And it's just been such an incredible journey. So I'm very, very glad that it has been such a reflective moment for all of you as well. Does anybody else want to speak to their experience with the assessment?
I'd be happy to. I second the fact that your staff is incredible, because I definitely felt like a little gnat asking questions every day and emailing, and it was just so helpful on my incredible journey through the assessment, which was a conglomeration of excitement, and sometimes I was uncomfortable, and sometimes I was having all these aha moments. And for me, I just have to thank you actually for, again, the amount of work that you put in, but also asking us to do all this data work and enter it in and then reflect, because without data, you can't really get a sense of where you are and be able to move forward in any kind of way. And for a small arts organization, we consider ourselves small at GLOW. Sometimes you're not really sure what data you need to be collecting, how you need to be reflecting, as a white-led organization, primarily white-led organization. So to have this structure was really, really good for us and for me.
Now, if I can actually tag on to that, the two words that I have been using to describe this to people I've talked to about this are eye-opening and grounding.
Yes.
In what it's doing for me and for my organization. Because I think one of the sort of wonderful ironies of this assessment is this is all empirical data. And I say ironic because, in my personal journey of learning, one of the things I have come to recognize is what is a frequent misused pillar of white supremacy culture is the over-valuing of objective information versus subjective information and people's feelings. And it's really tough, for anyone to really process the subjective. That's work everyone in this world needs to do. But and I think it's been one of I know for me personally as a white man, how I wrap my brain around how could I possibly ever understand the subjective emotional response that BIPOC individuals would have through all of this is hard, and I never could fully. But looking at empirical data, when I have numbers that you helped me to gather and find, it's actually looking at it from an objective. And so that's kind of ironic that it is looking at it through that empirical objective way, but it makes it a touch easier for me to be able to understand the subjective side of that reality because I have objective information that can then inform that process.
Right.
And
absolutely.
I would love to just add that I agree with everything everyone has said on this panel. And for me, every single question was a learning moment. I felt like it was like the best education you could have started me off on. And I feel like the next part is having you come in and what you're planning in the winter, full assessment, but every question, and then you dug deeper and you dug deeper. And I didn't even know these were things to think about. And suddenly I'm thinking about them. It was an amazing experience having to answer those questions, not even knowing that they were things I had to be thinking about. So it wasn't quite, it was like an amazing exploration, and yes, very uncomfortable at times, and but kind of soul searching with just those questions.
Yeah, amazing. These are the kinds of conversations that we want to be sparking, right? And particularly at this time. Evan, I love what you had to say about, the pillar of white supremacy that shows up particularly in like the culture of professionalism, right? Is like hard facts, hard evidence, hard data, right? And before this, I really feel like there wasn't really a way to quantify the things that I was going through as a BIPOC person, particularly a dark-skinned Black woman. There wasn't really a way to assess what was happening to me until we sat down and kind of all gathered this brain trust that Mandy Jo was talking about earlier. And we're like, hey, what are your experiences? Hey, what happened to you? Wait, what's happening to you currently? So that was really a key and very, very, very important part of what this assessment was as we were building it, as we continue to grow this assessment, that will continue to be at the heart of what it is that we're doing, right? And speaking of hard numbers and hard data, we have some really hard numbers and hard data for us today. But I also want to, with all of you here, say thank you first and foremost for your honesty, your openness, your willingness to share with us today. And I also want to release all of us, like big, deep breath in and out, release all of us from any feelings that of negativity or shame that we might have surrounding this stuff, because it's not about what we're doing, or what we've done. It's about knowing that and using that as a propeller, right? A jumping off point towards this bright and beautiful future that we're all building together for BIPOC folks, and also for everyone, right? Because when things get better for me and Mandy Jo and folks like us, right, things get better for everyone, right? When there's equity, particularly for BIPOC folks, there's equity for everyone, right? So I'm so looking forward to hopping into these numbers and having these tough but exciting conversations, right? Because this is a new jumping off point. And Mandy Jo, I wanted to toss it over to you to bring our first data point to us.
Yeah, absolutely. This one was particularly interesting to me. This one is about the types, the demographic in regards to the individuals who select the seasons for your company.
Absolutely. Can we get that on screen as well?
Yes, please. So as you can see, the racial makeup of the individuals selecting seasons, there were some BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, and people of color, But of those Black and Indigenous people of color, that subset of Black people is only 1, I believe. And then we have no Indigenous people that have a hand in selecting your seasons, which is just very, very hard to read. And then I'm sorry, that was 2 Black individuals, 0 Indigenous individuals, and in relation, 21 white individuals that had a hand in selecting season.
Yeah.
Given the fact that we select artistic pieces to produce and to put on stages based on our own personal experiences, our own lenses, and our own intersections, you know, it's not surprising to see such staggeringly overemphasized, such a heavy emphasis on predominantly white shows and predominantly, you know, and then within the Black, Indigenous, and people of color's playwright shows that are chosen, you know, there's usually not a delve very deep into the pool. It's usually like very, very famous,
Island, Color Purple,
right, very, very famous Black shows, which are bestsellers for a reason. They're wonderful shows, but we have thousands of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color who are playwrights whose work never gets seen,
right,
because BIPOC aren't really in charge of picking seasons at theaters. So that's an interesting data point to me, and I would really love to hear how seeing that data in aggregate, you know, makes the panel feel.
And before we get into that, I also want to just point out that the people that took the assessment, not just the panelists who are on the panel today,
correct,
right? This is across, you know, we had about, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but we had a larger pool than what you're seeing here. So this isn't just the panelists' data. This is from all those who completed the assessment. But yeah, I would also love to hear any thoughts that you all have regarding seeing this stark imagery of this illustration of the data.
It made me want to change how I do things. And I've already started a conversation with someone that I've been working with about, so we're a very small company. I'm the artistic director. I'm the one, I pick it all. But that maybe there has to be I know if my board is listening, but like 2 artistic directors or yeah, I've thought of these things. I haven't said out loud to anyone except who I'm talking to. But that the choice of what we do should not be just mine. I feel I've been in conversations with someone about sharing it, and so that's where it sent me.
Yeah. I will say too that part of this culture of white supremacy, right, is power hoarding, right? And it's not necessarily something we do intentionally or something that we normally think of, because, you know, white supremacy is structured so that there's one person at the top, right, who has all the knowledge and all the power, and then allows for other people to have certain pieces or parts of that knowledge and power. So, you know, that's definitely like a part of the white supremacist construct, but I would love to hear more thoughts regarding how that affects your individual organizations. Because I think it is important, also like you're saying, to be able to spread that more evenly.
Yeah, as she said, my organization is very similar, as you suggested, that as the producing artistic director, I make the choice. And for years, I have prided myself and patted myself on the back for the amount of effort I put into gathering suggestions and ideas. And our season, you know, our season selection process has been director centric, where I would say I don't necessarily pick all the shows so much as I try to have many conversations with many directors and artists, have them propose things to me, but then I do choose the projects at the end, and I have done that singularly. And I patted myself on the back for I've had so many conversations and talked to so many people and gotten so much input, but it doesn't change the fact that, you know, as the question was structured in the assessment, who chose, who made the decision, and there's no 2 ways around that. it's me. And this was another place where I sort of saw a sort of irony in how I did this assessment in the middle of 2020, that I came to the realization that perhaps I need to flatten the curve of how our organization is structured. That as you said, there is a power hoarding that I was not necessarily aware of, or in the ways that I was at times. I convinced myself it was what either was normal or necessary, or any other number of justifications I give myself that under not a very powerful microscope really don't hold up as true.
Right. I want to acknowledge before we move on. I want to just acknowledge before we move on that Ruby Williams is joining us. Ruby has a slick back hairstyle, a black shirt, and is in front of a white background. And she'll be interpreting for us as well. Sorry, Mandy Jo, go on.
No, you're fine. Thank you so much for introducing Ruby. I'd like to, on that point, there are several ways that we can deconstruct and kind of diffuse that power hoarding situation. One of which, it's so funny to me, because when I have these conversations with companies and with theaters, I tend to scare them. And it's interesting to me, because I feel like the solutions are very simple. But when I say something like, well, why don't you select a panel of community members to choose your shows? And then the artistic director can make suggestions, but does not have final say. Let the community leaders that you've chosen, and they can be different every year, and they can be a representation, a cross-section of your community demographics. And when I presented that idea to a board last month, they got really upset, because they were like, well, they don't know anything about what sells in theater and I said, well, they're kind of your audience. They would know what they want to see. But we're stuck in this idea that the upper echelon knows what's best for the art form. And the problem with that is and it's more than that, but there is definitely an element, an idea that, having your artistic director choose your season and having them have the final say is important, because then they're curating this artistic vision of what the theater produces. But ultimately, you're curating a vision of what you want to produce, and not necessarily what the community that you exist in wants to see. I mean, the communities that your theaters exist in have large communities of color in them. Right. And I don't think that your productions are in proportion to the community that's around you, and therefore your audiences won't be in proportion to the communities that are around you.
That's very true.
It's a big decision, choosing what to produce, and those shows will then determine who's coming to your theater, and then that will determine who's being hired at your theater, and so on and so forth. And that's when we end up in this rarefied air where only the highest of the high, the people who are able to scrape and claw over that barrier are now in the room.
Right.
And people of color often don't have the resources to scrape over that barrier the same way that white people do.
So do we have any ideas in this room? Mandy Jo, that's so important. Everything that you just said, and I 100% agree. And it ties into how white supremacy is gatekeeping, right? That's like a tool of a white supremacist framework, right? So then what can we do outside of and I'm putting this to the panelists, I would love to hear some of your ideas about what we can do to lessen that load and to make sure that that is evenly distributed, as Evan said, to flatten the curve of white supremacy. What can we do in those to provide that to these communities? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, what Mandy Jo was saying was something that with the way we select seasons at Glow is that I make suggestions and then it's voted on by our board. So we have a direct, pipeline to what gets chosen by how diverse our board is, right? So that's like a whole other level. So that's one of the things, that we need to be looking at, and I can talk about that a little bit later because I'm sure we'll touch on it.
Yeah.
But I one of the things that was suggested by the board was that we have an advisory committee, essentially, made up of people from our community. And I loved this idea because I think, I don't know how you guys feel, those of you that are artistic directors, but it feels like a lot of pressure to choose these seasons. And the thought that I could have advocates, right, and supporters built in that are helping me choose this season and making suggestions and ruling right on our season takes a lot of pressure off of me, because as Mandy Jo was saying, like, they're your audience. Those people are going to be the ones that are going to be bringing in the money. Like, I don't, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just one of these things where we don't have to choose between making money and serving our community, right? I think those things can go hand in hand. So my suggestion, I'm ripping off of Mandy Jo because it's something that we talked about with us, but I mean, that's a brilliant idea. Whew, I can feel the pressure lifting already with help like that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I think there's also just this, there's this idea that it's easier to do things this way, to have one person do it this way as opposed to having a panel. And we do so much in theater. There's so much that is done for the sake of expediency or the sake of simplicity. And yet, usually when we choose to go the simple route or the easy route, it's the route that is the least accessible, right, and the route that is the least, it's the route that is the least equitable. So, you know, we need to start doing things that might seem like they're counterintuitive and might seem like they're the harder way to do things, but they're the more thoughtful, and they're definitely the more equitable way to do things. And sharing power rather than hoarding power is such a stress. It's such a less stressful position to be in, to be perfectly frank. So I hope that by diffusing your power center, that you're actually going to feel less stress as humans, because you probably don't need that in your life either.
Absolutely. And then I saw you wanting to weigh in.
Yeah, the thing I wanted to add to this conversation, that I would say, I feel like taking it a little bit deeper beyond just spreading out the choice, as we look at it with a specific example of a season. And I think most artistic directors would agree with this. You know, it's not simply a matter of, well, I'm going to lay out a bunch of titles and decide which ones I want to see most. It's a much more complex process than that. It's not just, what do I think people want to see? It's, what can we afford here? And how does this, the lead time on this project? There's so many factors. And so it's not just about the choice, but it's still just as true to say that we can share the process, we can educate, and frankly, in the long run, it's going to make more people appreciate the work of art that is putting together a season in and of itself in the theater, which I like to believe is a collaborative art at all levels. But so it's not just say, which shows do you want to see? I think a lot of people would be afraid. I can imagine, Mandy Jo, the group that you were talking to, being afraid by the idea we can't just let them choose. But if you think, well, if you actually engaged more people in understanding everything goes into it, because I think there are a few people who actually think that it's just, I want to do this play, this play, this play, and this play, but they would have a deeper appreciation. And as you suggested, in the community, if they understood not only, well, these are the 5 plays I want to see, but these are the shows I can get the rights to. This show is going to cost this much money versus this show that's going to need this kind of budget. And people would learn, and they would grow, and they would have a deeper appreciation.
And they'd be invested.
And they would be deeper invested. And that actually is both, it's more complicated for them, but there too, you are lifting pressure. And frankly, I imagine I would probably get less crazy suggestions of people saying, you know what you should do this fall is Hamilton. Well, if they actually understood that in Herndon, Virginia, it's gonna be a couple of years before we can do Hamilton.
Well, and on that, yeah, and on that note, another thing that we see is a kind of homogeny of seasons, right?
Right.
As an actor, I can't tell you, I'm like, oh, this is the season for Sister Act. oh, this is the season for color purple, because I will go to 16 to 20 auditions for the same person of color show every year.
That's real.
And I know that that's not exclusive to being a Black, Indigenous, or person of color. That is true across the board. Every year, there's always one show that every theater does, because the rights are relatively cheaper. I don't know all of the things that go into it, but there was a year that everyone did Carousel, and I was like, great, so I'm not working this year. But you know, we have this homogeny of seasons, and I think that if we diffuse who is making these choices, we'll end up better in the long term as an art form, because we're going to have a diversity of seasons. Whereas I'm not going to go to Paper Mill Theater and see a show, and then go down to South Florida to you know, Coral Gables Playhouse and see a completely the exact same production, like 2 weeks later. I'm going to see, if I go from one coast to the other, you'll see thousands of different productions rather than the same 20. And keep in mind, you're paying a ton of money for the rights to some of these more popular shows, when you could have found playwrights in your community, invested in them, workshopping those shows, and then producing them on your stages and potentially creating the next American classic.
That
probably for a quarter amount of the money.
That part.
Just
I think
a thought.
No, but it's a great thought, and it's something definitely to dive into and to think about, and to you know, continue the conversation on. And I think this is something that we can bring in the members of our communities on, and have these talks. This is a place where you can reach out and say, hey folks, like, what would you like to be a part of? What would you like to know? And really develop those community-based relationships. So I love those thoughts. These are great thoughts. I wanted to kind of switch gears a little bit.
Let's do it.
Let's get into the, because we're talking about spheres of influence, right? And we've just talked about the people at the top of the chain, right? And now we want to talk about people who are casting shows, people who are doing this work. And I think that this is another really interesting look. Mandy Jo, I'm going to let you, let's look at the card. And I want you to, let's all take a look at this.
So this next data point specifically refers to casting personnel. And, you know, these numbers, again, don't reflect only the panel that is in front of you. These numbers are the aggregate of all of the participants who have taken the town hall in this version. And the demographics of the casting personnel are as follows. So based on the data we were given, we have 3 Black, Indigenous, or people of color as casting personnel in these theaters. Of those 3 Black, Indigenous, or people of color, all 3 were reported to be Black people, none of which were reported to be Indigenous people, and 8 were white people. So again, we're seeing a very, very heavily skewed casting scenario, where the person in charge of literally the gatekeeper of the talent is coming from heavily skewed towards a white perspective. And from what we know about casting, right, to become a casting director usually involves unpaid internships. It involves long hours of unpaid labor. It involves lots of networking. And so demographically speaking, it's safe to assume that a person who is able to become a professional casting director has put in those unpaid hours and most likely has some kind of safety net. So it's safe to assume that they're at least from lower middle class or above, because people who are below the poverty line generally don't have hundreds of hours of unpaid labor to give to anyone, least of all themselves. So we can assume that the intersections that are determining and driving these casting decisions, this person's perspective and this person's intersections are usually very privileged, very, white, mostly cisgendered. And so we're going to see, those intersections will reverberate through the casting choices they make, because that is their lens.
Yeah. So I would love to hear from some folks. Now, I know there's a couple of you on the panel that have like a non-traditional casting system. But I would love to hear from some folks on the panel with, first let's go with the traditional casting system and what that looks like for you within your organization. Like you bring people in, they audition, you cast them in shows, and that's that. Talk to me about what that looks like and how these numbers, what these numbers mean inside of your org. Like who are these people and what does it mean for them to have this demographic makeup? I would love to hear from you, Jenna, actually. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course. I wasn't sure if I heard my name.
No worries.
Yeah, of course. So I am a Wonder Woman staff of one.
I know.
And I remember being in one of your office hours going, how do I answer this question?
I know.
Who's casting? But then, Gabby, I thought about it and realized it goes deeper than that for us, because I'm realizing that the way our casting decisions are made, they are made by me, but also the music director and also our choreographer. There is nobody that gets cast in our organization that isn't agreed upon by all of those people, and all of those people are present. So I thought, well, that's a thing, right? It's not just me. And, I'm still the artistic director, right? I still am holding that power, right? Going, well, I may have these other people in the room with me who are saying, I really like this person and I really want this person. But at the end of the day, I'm still in the position where maybe they aren't telling me always exactly how they feel. Maybe sometimes the space that I think that I'm creating that's safe, because of the power structures, they don't always feel like they can push for a certain person if I've said, I don't really like that person, or whatever the case may be. Not that I've ever said that about someone, but just, or they don't, or if I have an opinion, they don't feel like they can disagree with it. So I had that conversation with myself where I was like, oh, great. My casting wise, it's not just me. And we do include BIPOC people in our casting decision. But then I had to step back and go, wait a second, I'm still that Wonder Woman person of one that is the sole staff member, that is the co-founder. And my voice in those rooms probably, unfortunately, will quote unquote count for more when it comes to people feeling safe and like they can express themselves. So that was a real light bulb for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really glad to hear you say that, you recognize the power and the weight that your position holds within your organization, right? And that though there are other people in the room, when you are in the room, that means that your voice can count more if you're not intentional, right? About making sure that the other voices in the room count just as much as yours, and that those other voices are aware that those voices count just as much as yours, right?
Yes.
Because we have to invite and empower people to speak their truth, speak their mind. And
because I can't just leave it up to chance. I can't just leave it up to chance that they know that their voice matters to me. Like I have to put that in, be very intentional and put that into practice and really think about that when we're making casting decisions around a table.
Right. That's great insight. Those are great things to think about. Does anybody else want to speak to this casting process and who those people who are running the casting are at your organizations?
This particular area, I will say, I've really been ruminating on it since filling out that section. I'm in a similar situation in that I am the casting director. I've told myself that I let the directors I hire, who most have been white, but I've told myself that regardless of who the director is, I let them make the decision about who they cast. But I'm generally there. I have in years past have had contracted casting directors, and they were all white women previously who were officially hired to do that. But the reason that this area I've really been ruminating on, and I'm still struggling with what the solution is because I would sort of argue after an artistic director, a casting director is probably, if it's not the artistic director, the most powerful artistic gatekeeper, because it is literally the person who is helping decide what artist gets to be a part of the work. Yeah. But as you said, as Mandy just said, it is a position that is frequently started with people who are giving a lot of free hours and doing more work than they're getting paid for. But at the same time, there's also this reality that, particularly in smaller organizations, and mine is not a tiny organization, but it's certainly not La Jolla Playhouse or Guthrie or an organization with millions upon millions, and they have their own issues to deal with. I know that many smaller theater organizations, it's one of the places that is frequently, there isn't one, or it is chopped out. And it's, I know from my personal experience, it's hard to think, well, how do I find the money to pay someone and value that person's time when I have so many other places that I'm trying to stretch $1? And that doesn't make it okay, but I know that because I've been the artist, I've been the casting director in my organization for the last few years, first and foremost, because it meant I didn't have to pay someone else to do it. And it was a job I felt qualified to do. Even if maybe I wasn't the best person to be doing it, I am technically, one could argue, qualified to do it. And that's a real struggle. And that's a struggle in many aspects of this. How do you balance your, the desires to create the greatest sense of equity you can with the financial challenges that associate with?
Agreed. That's and we're going to get into some more financial points a little bit later, because I think it's really important to talk about what communities and things that we're investing in and who we're investing in, most importantly. So I would love, yes. And Mandy Jo, I think you've got a really great point. You made a really great point about this before. So I'd love for you to speak to this point just a little.
Yeah. Before you move on, I would just like to pass this information to the panel and to anyone who's watching who might be in a similar situation. There are casting directors across the country who are really doing the work to figure out an inclusive and thoughtful casting process. One of which is a personal mentor of mine, Victor Vasquez with X Casting, and he's working on an inclusive casting process specifically. And talking to him about his process is just so fascinating and so exciting as an actor and so validating. So if you haven't had an opportunity to check out X Casting and Victor Vasquez, I highly, highly encourage you to do so.
Right. Amazing. Thank you for that resource, Mandy Jo.
Of course.
I'm already just so blown away by the conversation that's being had here today. I gotta say, this is just so incredible to hear what the assessment has brought up for everybody, how things have moved forward, and what this looks like. Now, Vanessa, I know you work with kids, and this is such an interesting thing to think about, right? When we're talking about casting performers and how we cast shows and things like that. But it's got to be even more on the other side of that, you as someone who works hard to ensure that the folks within your organization, the little folks within your organization particularly, will be able to be represented and be their fullest and best self. When you go into those processes and have the kids come in, first and foremost, I would love to know where you're going to find these families and what work you're doing to ensure that the kids that do come in and audition, you have a diverse pool to pull from, or work that you'd like to do in the future towards that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first, I just want to say that I do think that through the assessment, just and listening to this conversation, I've really been able to reflect on the fact that there is so much more work to be done here. Most recently, I would say we have had a little bit more success in being just much more intentional about where we reach out and who we reach out. But we mostly were reaching out on social media. And that's kind of where we just sort of post our auditions and things like that. And I would say over the last 6 months, and I actually think this might have stemmed from a conversation that I had with you, Gabby, but I've just been really trying to be a little bit more conscious of maintaining like very real relationships with my BIPOC community and Black friends. And I've been, reaching out and asking kids that maybe aren't able to afford to do our program, whether or not they maybe want to come and try it. I've also been trying to be a little extra cautious with our marketing efforts and the flyers to make sure that there is representation there and that they do see that we have a diverse group of kids that are going to be in the room. And so that when they come to our rehearsals or they decide to join us, that they do know that there are other people there that look like them.
Yeah.
As far as the casting table is concerned, we are one of the companies that we do non-traditional casting. We take them through the audition process so that as they embark into the world of theater and potentially professional theater, that they know what that type of audition would feel like. Mm-hmm. And what I've been able to reflect on from this assessment is that even though we're not doing traditional casting, it's still very important in my classroom that we do have a very representative table, that we're setting that expectation early. Like as an educator, that's my job. It's my job to show them what it's supposed to look like when they do go out there. And this is for all of my students, not just the BIPOC Black students that this affects the most, but for our white students who maybe won't end up being professional actors after all, but will likely have some sort of an influence or a career in the arts, and they might end up being these decision makers who need to know it's important. Right. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We are working hard to diversify our staff, and we've already started to do that, but we're going to continue to do it. We're committed to making sure that we do that, and we have some work to do.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much. I know that was a very direct question, but I'm super interested because you're raising essentially the theater makers of tomorrow. So I think that it's so essential to know, like, okay, what's the thought process going into, putting forward these shows and things of that nature. So thank you so much for answering that. I want to move forward to another data point that I thought was very interesting. This is kind of a two-parter, right? So when we're thinking about people who are in charge of the show, essentially, right? We're thinking artistic directors who are, picking the season and what that looks like. And then we're thinking about people who are casting the show and like putting the performers who will be on stage into the show, right? And then we're also thinking about people who are moving the show forward, right? And those people are the folks who are the directors of these works, right? Now, I'm going to show you an image that might be, we're at Halloween, so I'm going to say a little frightening. Can we get the classical, directors of classical works image up there?
Oof.
Pretty stark, huh? Yeah. Let's all take that in for a second. That's 4 and 1, right? How do we feel seeing that image? How do we feel seeing that image?
Yeah, I can speak to that. That it feels awful, and I'll admit that was something I did not think about. We're a teeny company. up to now been directing everything, casting everything. And as I'm thinking about and working towards this season, having directors, especially women, BIPOC directors come in, I was thinking of finding with them or I was thinking that these directors would be directing plays by BIPOC playwrights. And I just made that differentiation.
That's also called, Melissa, just to like, that's also called a segregation.
Yeah. Yes. And again, like Evan, had myself on this is where we're heading. And then I thought, I mean, just it happened. We hired someone to do our February play. I'm going to let her choose whatever play she wants to direct. It didn't, that was like a curtain opening for me that I didn't realize I had that prejudice, or I just didn't see it. Yeah.
It's so incredible. And like, thank you for saying that out loud. I didn't realize that I had that prejudice, because that's the reality of what this is. Now, I said this is a two-parter, right? And I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I want to put up the number of BIPOC folks. So can we get the people who have directed BIPOC works, that image up? Take a look at that. So to me, what that looks like is that it isn't about, we can take that image down too. I think we get that picture. To me, what that signals is that it's not about the fact that we cannot find BIPOC directors, right? Particularly Black directors. It's not about the fact that we cannot find them, right? Because that's the excuse I've heard a lot. Oh, we just didn't find anyone. We couldn't find anyone. We didn't know anyone. We couldn't find anyone. It's not that we can't find them. It's that, as Melissa has said, there's a prejudice in our minds, right? That we're either conscious or unconscious of, that is keeping us blocked from being able to see Black people, BIPOC folks, particularly Black women, I'll say as well. Because we're not even measuring that demographic, right? We're strictly measuring racial demographics. But I'm thinking like even particularly Black women and like particularly dark-skinned Black women, because as we learned in our last town hall, skin tone is political, right? And our ability to connect and associate, particularly, I'm thinking like from my frame of reference, dark-skinned Black women with the ability to direct and lead works that we hold as sacred within our communities, right? Because when we're talking about Shakespearean text, we're talking about like text that is, like this is biblical for, the theater realm, right? And so who are we trusting? Who do we trust to carry forward those works versus who do we trust to carry forward the works of BIPOC writers, BIPOC, creators? So I think that I would love to hear some folks speak to their initial thoughts after seeing that data and those data points together, and B, what can we do to move this industry forward to, as Melissa said, which I'm so glad that you called that out and said that, Melissa. Thank you for being brave and saying the word prejudice there, because that's what it is, right? And we have to acknowledge that, and we have to understand that, and we have to move forward through that, right?
So important.
What can we do? How do you feel seeing that, and what can we do to move forward through it? And I'll let anybody answer this one.
I mean, nobody likes to be relegated, right? To like, these are the things that you can do and these are the things that you can't do. Just speaking from my own personal experience, because that's the only experience that I know, right? Jenna, you come and you direct this show that is for women and by women, but we're not really going to consider you for the rest of these shows or for shows that have generally been, directed by males, right? Like that feeling just blows. And to reconcile with the fact that, now listen, I am, again, the one person that has primarily been directing, but my company, I think, fell into what I think a lot of companies do, where we go, well, this is the way it's always been. We're small, and so therefore you're our only director, right? And so you can just direct all of these things, right? And I think that I hit my breaking point with that a lot sooner than I was able to communicate and change that, because this was to be before COVID, the first time that we were even going to hire a guest director at Glow. And I think that if we continue this idea that we're just going to do it because we see other people do it and this is the way we've always done it, and we don't examine how we're putting people into those boxes,
right,
we are destined to just create the most boring, horrible, inauthentic, offensive stuff, right? Which I can say I've seen, and I can say sometimes I've partaken in.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's all I really have to say about that. It's got me, those graphics got me doing this, Gotta take a breath.
Yeah. Anyone else want to speak to the feeling, just seeing that? I saw some pretty strong emotional reactions, like just on faces, facial expressions when I presented that data.
I'll say that the sort of slightly different realization and reaction that I had to this is sort of looking at it, flipping that lens is also looking, as I said, for the most part, I speak to directors and have them suggest works and ideas to me. And, I use that as my defense mechanism for many things that I'm needing to rethink. But I do have to then, because I was like, well, I didn't not ask BIPOC directors to direct Shakespeare, or say they couldn't, they didn't propose it. And then I did have a moment, oh, wait, I wonder if, again, because I am the white male artistic director, I can't say that I haven't worked with brilliant BIPOC directors who would have loved to do Shakespeare for me and maybe thought, that's not what he's looking for me, because that is what the world has taught them, to don't bring that work, that they can't necessarily be their most authentic self and most honest self artists because of what the world has told them I'm expecting from them.
Right.
And I need to be more active in breaking that down for them and working to say, truly tell me, what are your wildest dreams artistically? Because I do believe that's where the greatest art comes from, is when you free people to do what they truly are passionate about and not just what is expected of them. And that has nothing to do with the color of someone's skin, but we have to acknowledge that BIPOC people have been faced with that pressure in a way that I know I will never fully understand, but breaks my heart to understand on the most surface level.
Okay. So what can we do? What are some actionable steps that we can take toward not only flattening the curve? We're going to use that, Evan. We're going to use that the whole time. To not only flattening that curve of white supremacy, right? But like, what can we do to move us forward in these conversations? Because, it's a lot, right? To sit down with someone, Evan, and say, what are your wildest dreams? But how can we ensure that at the very base level, these folks who are coming into our organizations as guests and as collaborators feel comfortable enough to bring the authentic versions of themselves that will allow for those great works? What are some actionable, real world changes that we can implement, things that we can do to bring that forward?
My two quick responses to that is, that's as far as creating a space, a brave space, and where people do feel that they can be give voice to their wildest dreams. That is a longer process because that requires building trust individually and institutionally. And we have to do that work, and that work is not going to happen overnight. Right. And that is something that we have to struggle with. I would say possibly the shorter term, because we can't fully control. We can take lots of steps, but we can't fully control someone else's process of trusting you. You can do the work, but they have to have their time to do that. In the short term, I think one of the simple answers there is, I've always, I know for me as an artistic director, I've always tried to think, well, I don't want to do the same kind of show again and again. I want diversity in every possible definition of the term. This assessment has taught me all kinds of ways I have never considered diversity. And it's like, well, I've done some Shakespeare. What were the makeup of the groups of artists that did that? I've done that kind of Shakespeare a few times. Maybe I need to think about how I can do Shakespeare different and prioritize that happening. And that's not just Shakespeare, that's any kind of theater. It's not just about topic or playwright or director. It is about the full mixture of everybody involved. Have you done that before?
Right.
That's real.
And make the conscious effort not to.
That's real.
I
that
think
we can control.
Yeah, and also the other thing we can control too is resources, right? Like, yes, of course, policies, right, put into place to make sure that the people that are coming to work with us feel like they have creative control, right? That they don't have to advocate for themselves every single day, that we are actually advocating for them as a company. But I also think it's about making sure that we're pouring our resources, financial, time, community support, board support, everybody shows up. Mm-hmm. The same way that everybody would show up for me when I was the only one directing at my company, and the way that I want that for anybody else that's going to come in as a guest director. I want to give them designers and support staff that are going to advocate for them. I want to make sure that it's not just me going, okay, I choose you, and then I'm going to choose all the people around you too. That like I'm allowing the people that are coming into my company to advocate for other people as well, that they want to see with us at Glow. So for us, I'm like, we don't have we're not a huge company with a large budget, but dang it, I'm going to give you all the resources that I possibly can to try to have you, come into our space and feel literally like a guest, a guest director. And you can tell I've been thinking a lot about this because this is the first season we'll have one. So I've been thinking a lot about how to do that.
This is essential. This is essential. I'm so glad to hear. So there are a couple of things. That I wanted to flag about this portion of the conversation, right? I heard two sort of buzzy words, and I think we have a couple more data points to get into, but I think it's important, and I think this is something that we can talk about, all of us, right? I heard a couple of buzzy words. I heard the work. And for me, a lot of these conversations have been, I'm currently having a lot of conversations with a particularly large corporate organization right now who is very interested in having brave conversations. And a lot of those conversations are with executives within this corporation, right? And so a lot of the executives have been talking about how they're doing the work, right? Can someone here tell me in hard, detailed, factual, what is the work? What does that mean? Can someone define that for me? What is the work? Oh, yeah?
No, you can't. I mean, no, you can't. It's too simplistic. It's too boiled down. It's too, I understand what you're saying there. Yeah.
So for me, what I would love, and this is speaking as a Black performer, like all of the other hats off, right? Just as a Black person coming into an organization as a performer, and now as I'm moving up into like the fullness of what I want to become, right? Director, you know, all of these cool things, producer, all those cool, neat things that I want to do. I would love, instead of us saying like, we got to do the work, because I think that's, you know, become like a fallback, and like not jumping on anybody that said it in this conversation, because it's a word, right? It's something that, it's a phrase that we use. But instead of the work, I want to hear concrete plans forward. Like, I want to hear, you know what? We are prioritizing, as Evan said, we're prioritizing ensuring that BIPOC directors are the only people directing our Shakespeare stuff. Mm-hmm. These are the only people who are going to direct Shakespeare for the next 5 years. Or I want to hear, you know, our casting team, we are adding 3 BIPOC folks to our casting team, one of which is Indigenous, one of which is Black, in the next 2 years. That's what we're doing. As opposed to saying like, oh, we got to do the work. Because I just asked this group of people what the work is, and everybody went, you know, like, because you can't define it.
No.
And it's a very buzzy buzzword, but you can't define it.
It lacks specificity. It lacks intention. And that's the problem right now, at least for me, in observation, as an advocate, as a Black performer, as a Black woman performer. I just feel like there's so much good energy towards the work, but so little intention.
Right.
You know, it's really in right now. Black Lives Matter. People can say their full chest, and no one's scared to say that anymore, and that's fantastic. But when I say Black Lives Matter, you know, when we say Black theater artists matter, what does that mean?
Right.
What does that mean to your company?
Right.
Specifically, not just a blanket public statement. I want to see actionable steps, and I want to see intention. You know, that's important. And I have a few things I want to touch on before we leave about intention, but I want to give Gabby the room to discuss the data points.
Yes, we just have a couple more, and then we're gonna go through these couple more data points and just kind of, you know, have a short conversation, and then I want to get to Mandy Jo's, what Mandy Jo has to say, and then we're gonna take some questions from our viewership. So, anybody out there, please put in your questions to our panelists. We've had a lot of really, really great conversation today, so I'm really looking forward to what they all have to say. All right, so moving forward, I wanted to touch briefly on talking about demographics for people who are designing the shows, right? Because we're kind of moving through the spheres of influence now, and we're to the designers. And Jenna made a really great point, I think, earlier. Thank you so much for that. Look at that. Yeah, another really stark comparison. So Jenna made a really great point earlier about allowing folks who you're inviting into your organizations to bring in people that they know, that they trust, right? And not just relying on yourself. And looking at that graphic, we saw again the same, it's a trend, right? We kind of know now at this point that when we look at a graph, it's going to look like that, right? So I think, you know, what Jenna said was a really actionable step towards changing that demographic, right? Changing that demographic makeup. Can we think of anything else, like any other actionable steps towards that kind of work? I mean, for me, I think it would look like creating a space that it was clear to BIPOC folks within your community, creating relationships with the BIPOC folks in your community that made it clear that your space not only welcomes, but invites and celebrates them.
That's so important. It's so important, you know, and if I may, I can kind of give an example towards what the example that Jenna gave, and that is, my organization recently partnered with a theater to put on a series of plays about anti-racism. And one of our conditions was We want to do all the hiring, all of it. That is our condition. We are bringing in 100% of the personnel for this project. And we did not bring in a single person who was not, aside from the actors and the required racial and gender demographics for the shows, every stage manager, every director, every producer, every casting director was a Black woman. And I will tell you that since we did that play cycle at that show, at that theater, they have since created relationships not only with the women that worked within our play reading, but women who saw that play reading, women in the community who were witness and party to it, who felt, oh, this space is a place for me. Mm-hmm. And now I know 3 other Black women who are directing in their season next year. I've recently met 2 other Black women who are stage managers for them who weren't a part of my hiring. They created these relationships because they created a space where they allowed us to bring in all of these people, and that created an environment that was more welcoming for that demographic. And now a company that had 0 Black women that were not on their stage have completely and utterly flipped their demographic profile. And that, I think, is, and that was a simple thing for us to say, we're going to do all of the hiring. We're going to do all of the creative hiring here. And they gave us that power, and it resulted in this shift in their personnel, right? In magnitude outside of the people we brought. So just an example of that actionable step in practice.
Right. I also want to talk a little bit about like the fact that the community heard about this because it was shared widely, right? It was shared in a way that the community had access to it. And Vanessa, we had a really great conversation the other day about how you've been sharing with your younger kids, like the processes that you've been going through and the things that you've been thinking about. And I wanted to just talk about a little bit about what this community information sharing looks like from, like, you know, we're talking about Mandy Jo with like grown adults, like doing this work, right? But even we have like the theater makers of tomorrow. What does that look like when you share that information, and how has it changed your organization? How has it moved your organization forward?
Yeah, so I think that as an artistic director or a director in past years, there's a lot of times when I will make decisions for the organization, for the kids. And I make those decisions knowing that I'm not going to, for example, I'm not going to let an adorable, a girl who can sing, Caucasian little girl sing in one of my shows and sing "I Am Here." Right. I have my reasons, and I'll say no. And, you know, we don't really have a conversation about it in the past. Through taking this assessment and just some other stuff that I've done over the last 6 months, I started to realize that I'm really robbing them and all of my students the opportunity of seeing this for what it is. And if I'm making these decisions with just my staff and just myself, and I'm not explaining to them why, then they're not, it's an opportunity that I'm taking away from them. And so recently, I mean, this happens a lot with like choreography and things like that, but recently we were choreographing a number. My staff member choreographed a movement that I wanted to take out. And the reason why is because it's for competitive purposes, and there's no program, no way to credit where it's rooted from. And it linked back to waking and voguing, and I just felt like there was really no reason for it in this number. And so I whispered it to my choreographer. I said, I really don't want to do that in this number. Like, we can't credit, we can't, like, there's no reason for it right now. Like, you're white. We had a whole conversation about it. She said, okay, she changed it. And then in that moment, I just had like this thing go off in my head that says, all of these kids are watching you change it, and they're not going to ask any questions, because how often do we change choreography? But I finally just took that moment and said, all right, so this is what's going on. And we had a whole conversation about it. And these are middle school and high school students, and they were literally like, Vanessa, can you send me the link? Like, can you send me more information about that? I want to learn about that. And I told them that I saw this really great documentary on it, and they said, I really want to watch that. And so even after rehearsal, I had kids coming up to me saying, like, can I write down that information, or can you text me the information? And so it just really kind of reconfirms that these kids want to do better too. They want to know more. And as an educator, that's my responsibility, to not make decisions in a vacuum and to put it all out there. We need policies, and we need people to know not only what those policies are, but why we made them.
Yes, 100%. It shifts the conversation. It shifts the dynamics, right? No pun intended. It does that work, right?
Yeah, I mean, and kids, adults, everybody is old enough. Everybody's ready. We're all ready for these conversations, and we can't worry about who's uncomfortable anymore, because we need to do it. We need to make these changes, and it's just, these kids are amazing. Like, they're willing to do it. They want to do it. They're hungry for the information, and so I'm going to give it to them.
Right. I think too, like, we're coming to a point in our industry where everybody's kind of hungry for this information, right? But I think there's like a double-edged sword to that. And Mandy Jo, I think we talked a little bit about this too, where people are hungry for this information and so afraid that they might get something wrong that they're willing to do anything at any time, no matter what, and without consciously thinking about the consequences. And something that Mandy Jo and I talked a lot about was thoughtful inclusion, because a lot of people are hungry for this kind of information, right? And so when you're looking for, okay, well, what can I do? And then someone says, well, hire more BIPOC directors. And you're like, okay, great. Well, and then you go and you Google search, right, Mandy Jo? Like, you Google search, like, BIPOC folks that I can hire. And then you see the list and you're like, great. Then you take the list and you copy paste all those emails into a single email and you send it off. But that's not really thoughtfully including people into your organization, right?
It's dehumanizing. It feels dehumanizing. It feels faceless.
Absolutely. And in specific, there's kind of a thing that's been going around the theater industry the past couple of years, in the form, now that we have Google, which is fantastic. We have these living documents that are directories, right? Particularly within my community of Black, Indigenous, people of color, directories of stage managers, directors, lighting designers, costumers. Those resources exist, but understand them for what they are. They are the labor that you should have done for yourself.
Yeah.
And in the place of that labor, now all you have to do is copy and paste 150 emails and send it out and saying, hey, we're looking for a costume designer for this production. Would you like to submit? And then you get a bunch of results, right? Which sounds great and easy and simple and a wonder of the modern world. Hey. But in reality, there is no intention behind what you have just done.
Right.
What you could do instead is look at that list, because I'm not saying you shouldn't use these lists. By all means, the labor was compiled for your use, but use it with intention. Go on that list, Google that person, look at their portfolio, send them an email and say, hey, I really love your West African influences in your costume design. We're thinking about doing a production of, I don't know, Henry VIII set in Sierra Leone. How would you be interested in meeting with us about designing the costumes for this production? Very different than copy and pasting 150 emails and saying, please submit for our season.
Right.
It's just a very different thought process, right? Like, if I could share anything with this panel and with our audience, it would be, you can't be inclusive, thoughtfully inclusive, if you take shortcuts. And I mean that in every sense of the word.
Yes.
That's a shortcut. And that shortcut eliminates the need for thoughtful choices. Instead of using that Google Doc, you could then go to the Black, Indigenous, and people of color that you know and that you work with and said, hey, do you know someone? Because I guarantee you they probably do.
Right.
They can refer you, and then you have a personal reference as opposed to a Google Doc.
Right.
Also, you know, and everyone has a different opinion about this. I'm not here to say that my opinion is the be all end all. And I'm also not here to dump on anyone, just like Gabby was saying earlier. But Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, and the acronym known as BIPOC,
right,
is a very intentional choice of vocabulary. And I've been hearing it used more and more and more to the point where it's becoming innocuous. And the people that are using it the most are non-Black, non-Indigenous, non-people of color.
Right.
And so my challenge to you is, don't use the acronym. Say Black, Indigenous, and People of Color every time you go to use BIPOC. Right. Be intentional. Be intentional. Because we use that acronym and then it loses all its meaning.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
That's just my take on it. And I like I said, I am not speaking as a representative for the monolith of Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. Everyone will have their own opinion about this, and some people don't even like that term at all. And we acknowledge and hold space for that, and we always have. But I think as white allies, it would be important to me, particularly as an ally for other intersections and other gender expressions, other identities, being an ally in other realms of my life, I try to be intentional. And so I don't use a lot of acronyms because sometimes those acronyms aren't meant for me. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important. I think a lot of people have a problem saying the word Black people.
True.
And I think that we need to negate that feeling.
Yes. Black
but
is
anyway,
not a bad word.
Black is not a bad word.
If I could jump in, I just want to say I actually typed that wisdom that you just put down about saying Black, Indigenous, People of Color, and I want to point something out that has to do with the assessment for me. I said no and put a 0 on every single line item in the assessment that had to do with Indigenous people, because we have never had an Indigenous person work for our organization. And so when all of a sudden the assessment started saying, would ask the general question about Black, Indigenous, People of Color, in my brain, I kept going, how can I answer this question appropriately if I have not involved Indigenous people in my organization? So I just want to tell you, you gave me a light bulb moment, because I'm like, you're right. You have to say it out, because if you don't, and I'm only going to shorten it for a point, when I was saying BIPOC, right, our own minds decide what that is instead of actually saying it out and recognizing that it means much more than we think it does, and it's specific and it's meaningful. So, yeah, thank you for that.
I'm really glad that was a takeaway, because that was something that was so important. And even in just saying like the word Indigenous as well, right? That can even be constituted as very monolithic verbiage, right? Because we're classifying, but like also African people are Indigenous. There's
Central American people are Indigenous.
Indigenous, right? And so when we're talking about Indigenous, and we cover this in the assessment as well, we talk about how, and this is something that we pulled directly from the We See You White American Theater documentation, which was so essential to a lot of the building that we did on the assessment, because we wanted people to be able to, people who were maybe intimidated by the document, to still get the full breadth of the work that goes into that went into that document. We wanted to still weave that in and be able to have that. But, it talks about, the document talks about, what it actually means to say Indigenous, right? And the Native American or the Native Alaskan and Hawaiian Native folks who are inside of that I, right? That all-encompassing I, even that is monolithic. So we, with intention, we have to push forward and understand, even like this land acknowledgement that we do, right? We're all sitting on stolen land, you know, and acknowledging Indigenous erasure within the framework of white supremacy and anti-Blackness. And this is all at the beginning of the assessment. So I know you all have read it because a lot of you actually emailed me about it and were like, wow, this even just blew my mind, you know, but even that work, that framework of what white supremacy means, what anti-Blackness means, what Indigenous erasure means. Like these things are all very important. I want to take a look because we're running out of time here, but I want to make sure we hit these last few points because they are incredible to think about and to look at. So if we could get the graphic of I think we have the performer graphic coming up next. Yes, performers cast. Hey, take a look at that.
Now, Gabby, can I ask you, is this just an aggregate of that data particularly is an aggregate of this version of the assessment, none of the prior?
No, none of the prior assessments.
Part of that?
No, none of the prior assessments.
It tracks almost exactly identically.
Exactly identically, right? And that to me, but I want to make a further point because this is another twofold. We saw that, right? Let's look at what that means investment-wise, fiscally, because we were talking about fiscal points, right? Can I get the graphic of compensation? This is what that means.
You know, this should be embarrassing.
It is.
And this should be talked about more. We need to be talking about fiscal things. We need to take away this idea that we can't talk about what we make. We can't talk about what that contract is worth. We can't talk about how much that theater paid me or how much that, you know, having what is it, Art Search add their pay scale range to the job applications, that got people angry. But it's so important. I want to know how much the artistic director of the theater I'm working at is making when they're telling me that they can only pay me $110 a week for a fully vested equity show. I want to know.
Yeah.
I think that's a worthy conversation to have, because when we don't talk about it, we get information like that. Pennies on the dollar for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Pennies. This isn't even a direct correlation.
I want to.
Sorry, go ahead.
I want to put some gravity on this information because when I first opened that, because I had these graphics made by one of our incredible team members, and when Sierra sent me that documentation, I'm about to cry right now. I cried a little bit. I was very upset. It also means that we're not hiring BIPOC folks, like, let's be clear, and particularly Indigenous people, right? We're particularly not hiring Indigenous people. And so do you see now the correlation? Like, I want everyone that's in the audience right now to have seen that and to understand what that means. But it's not just a problem for who's on stage. Can we get that last graphic? The very last one.
This is just...
This is an all-encompassing issue.
And we're not just, this isn't, when we think of theater, we always think of like, oh yeah, who's cast, who is this, who's working on this? It's not just an artistic endeavor. This is a hiring practice and should be subject to the same federal laws that other companies are subject to. And if any other company, if McDonald's Corp had these numbers, they would be in front of a congressional hearing answering for these numbers. And theater does not have to answer for these numbers.
Now, I will say, knowing this information is the real power. Knowing this information should be so empowering to all of us, right?
Yes.
Because we have this information and it is clear who is getting what, what communities are being invested in, right? Because what we just saw there weren't just numbers, right? We saw community investment. We saw individual investment. We saw who we're investing our dollars. And we know that in a capitalistic society, right, the dollar is king. And the dollar speaks to where our heart is. And we just saw, pardon me, we just saw where our heart is. And your heart is not with me.
You know, Black women, the demographics change, and it varies by like 1 or 2 pennies every time they do this number, but somewhere like 66 cents on the dollar. And these numbers are even lower. And that, I don't know how we can say that we value Black voices, that we value the voices of people of color, that we value Indigenous voices when we don't put our money in them. We don't invest because we live in a capitalist society. If you value them, you put money into it. That when you have value for something, that is the only way this capitalist white supremacist system denotes any kind of value is with money.
The truth. So those
Sorry,
are
I'm getting very
Me too.
I know Gabby and I are very emotional about this particular subject, so it's a little difficult to stay even and unbiased, but
I won't apologize for being uneven or unbiased either, because we just said Black Lives Matter, right? But these are 2 very real Black lives in front of you. Holistic human beings with thoughts and feelings and emotions. And my feelings are hurt. And it's not you.
And the basic need to survive. How about that? The basic need to survive.
That's real. Because my feelings get real hurt if I can't pay my bills. You feel me? My feelings get real hurt if I can't pay my bills. So here's the thing that we need to think about before, and we're going to move into audience questions here in just a second. But here's the thing that we need to think about. Because I know Mandy and Joel and I are talking, and I can't wait to hear some of your voices on this stuff. But the thing we need to think about is forward. Where are we going? Particularly after seeing this. Because it's no wonder that a Black actress has to have 5, 6, 7 jobs. At one point, I was working 8 jobs. 8 jobs.
Yep, that tracks.
As an actor. And it's no wonder that I have to and my white friends can not. Right? So.
Also, when would you have time for an unpaid internship when you work 8 jobs to advance your career in the arts as a director or a casting director or an agent or a producer?
Right. So I know these are sobering things to think about. I see it on your faces. Okay, so we're going to move into the Q&A portion. I have some questions from our audience members. I'm going to ask a couple of them, and I hope to hear your voices on these. Jennifer Ledesma asks, what part of the assessment was most eye-opening? Can anybody answer that one? Oh, I know we took y'all to a space. It's all right. Take a breath.
Take a breath.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I can answer that. And I think some of it is also in response to what we were just talking about, but and also revisiting buzzwords, right? Equity, inclusion, representation, diversity, right? Like, I think one of the things that was sort of the most eye-opening for me with the assessment was like understanding and trying to understand the difference between representation and equity inclusion and not conflating all of them, because the assessment, I think, made it really clear for me that you don't just become anti-racist because you're casting ethnically appropriate or you have onstage representation for Black, Indigenous, people of color. I think for me, it was like looking at our data and realizing that while we might be doing better in terms of representation than other areas, can we really be called inclusive if we aren't making a commitment to hire Black, Indigenous, people of color designers? Can we really be equitable if, like those graphics are showing, so much of our money is being funneled into white people and white centered things? And so representation just kind of scratches the surface, I feel like, of the work, just in terms of finding a way to really be more equitable. That was the biggest thing for me. I was like, oh gosh, no, this is an iceberg, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, it goes like really, 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 really deep in terms of how we need to do this, how we need to become more anti-racist.
Right.
That was the biggest thing for me.
Amazing.
I was kind of done with the whole, like in the reflection, it would ask, what are some things you feel like you're doing well? And of course I filled that out. But it was good. And it was actually very freeing to stop patting myself on the back for things, and to actually see what the reality was, and to feel, quite honestly, and I credit the assessment for this, to feel for the first time in a while the hope that I had a way forward, right? That I was going through the assessment, and any of the policy suggestions or questions, I was copying and pasting them, going, oh my gosh, what great suggestions. And so I want to let you know that, yes, there were surprising things, but I also felt invigorated by this, excited by this in a way that I haven't really before.
Good. That's really incredible to hear. I won't say much because I want to hear from you guys on this.
Sure.
Anyone else?
Sure. I'll say something. It was just this last topic that, and Gabby, you and I discussed this just the other day. It was the financial numbers, that got me. And I've said this a couple of times. It was ironic to me as I processed it that the numbers of human beings did not have the same impact and clarity as the dollars. And it's ironic that it was the dollars that really gave me the truer sense of the human impact of how my organization has valued and not valued, because there's no other word for it. But one of the, as you and everyone at Joy Jackson Initiative has offered so much patience and grace to our organizations in this, as I initially processed these and was devastated by these numbers. And I will say the word, I felt like a failure in so many regards. But then I reminded something that is a core principle for me as an artist. In every show that my organization does, like any show anywhere, you have people who love you and support you, and they will come up to you and say, oh my God, I loved it. And this was great. This was great. This was it. A core principle for me as an artist, when I'm talking to people after show, is I'm like, that's great. Thank you so much. Tell me what you didn't like. Because I can't fix great. I can't improve on great. I can't become better than what you tell me I'm already doing well. I can only get better by criticism. And criticism doesn't have to be painful, and it doesn't have to be about breaking you down. Good criticism is about building you up. And so in the depths of my feeling like a failure, in the process of recognizing where I have failed the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities around me, I said, now I know some criticisms. Now I can be better. And so from failure, as we just said, I do feel a new sense of hope and power to make it better. And it will never change what the past has been, but the past is past. I don't have control of past. But I can, in the midst of failure, I can feel wonderful in knowing that I have a new sense of control and power over the future.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That's beautiful. I want to take it to Mandy Jo. You have another question from the audience, right?
Yes, we do. We have another question, and it is from Jumoke Adebimpe. How do you manage for environments where Black, Indigenous, and people of color are invited but not welcome? You can hire people in, but if they aren't really welcome, how does that work even if you're meeting your hiring goals? And we actually talk about this a lot at BTGM, because this is one of the reasons that we became an advocacy group, because we started as a networking organization so that people could hear about auditions and resources, and we were all about change the stage. You know, you don't book, you book, you know, you don't get cast in 100% of the auditions you don't show up for. So we had been pushing our members to just audition for everything you might be interested in. And it occurred to me that I'm not helping anyone if I am encouraging them to audition and work in jobs that they are then traumatized and microaggressed and silenced and made to feel less than and made to feel other. Yeah, I booked them a gig. BTGM got them the information that booked them a gig, but that gig did not improve their life. Which is why we became an advocacy organization, so that we could say, here's the auditions for these theaters, and yes, we are working with these theaters to make sure that you as an artist are heard and valued.
I think I would love to hear, Vanessa, I'd love to hear your voice on this, and Melissa as well. I know, Vanessa, it's different for you. That's why, because I'm so interested in hearing about the theater makers of tomorrow, right? So I want to hear for you, like, how do you, navigate moving a space from a place that might be an unwelcoming experience for younger kids to a space that is like incredibly welcoming for other children, for kids who are, you know, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, right? So how do you navigate those things? How do you make those spaces welcoming, and what can you do, you know, for the next generation?
Yeah, I think that it goes back to a lot of the stuff that we were speaking about in the beginning, and it has to be a little bit more than intention, but I think just setting those priorities out there. I think in my organization in particular, it's really important that I do give voice, more of a voice, to my Black, Indigenous, people of color students who are already there, and really make sure that they're heard and they're seen and that they know that they are valued, so that we continue to kind of attract that same thing, if that makes any sense. But I think for all of our organizations, the more that we're able to elevate those voices, and the more that we're able to make sure that the people in power are not power hoarding, and that the creative teams are more representative for these, especially for these kids, so that they can see people that look like them, people that they can relate to, the more that we are inviting that into that space, and the safer they're going to feel. Because I mean, it has to be a priority. Those policies have to be spoken about. The education and the conversation has to continue, and those decisions can't be made in a vacuum anymore. So for us, I think that's kind of our steps moving forward, is getting those kids much more involved in this process, and making sure that none of it happens in a vacuum, that we're all perfectly aware of exactly why this is happening, and that these conversations are a regular part of our organization. I mean, we're called Free to Be Me. Like, people need to know that they can come in there and they are welcome, and that not only are they welcome, but we really, really want to celebrate everyone.
Right.
The question reminds me of a conversation I had with you, Gabby, at the beginning, and I told you all the changes we're making, and you said to me, "That's good. how do you make sure you make it a safe space, that it's safe and inviting? And that question has been, that's the question that I'm struggling with and looking, for the answers. And I remember in the assessment learning about a sensitivity coach or a cultural coach, people I could hire to help with casting, with picking a season. Just I didn't know that existed, and so I'm looking to learn how it's not just inviting people in, but making it a place that is welcoming and safe.
Right. Now I have one last question before we wrap everything up. I want to know, Aaron Tate asks, did any panelists encounter resistance in completing the assessment from others in your organization? And how did you handle it? Did anybody experience any resistance from anybody else within their org? No? Thrilling. That's really exciting.
Not resistance per se, but I did have some questioning. I had a couple, I'll be honest, I had a couple of staff members that I think, comparatively speaking, they looked at our organization and they feel like, well, we're doing really well in this area. Like, look at our children's theater group and look at some of the other theater groups, and we really are diverse. And so I wouldn't say it was resistance. It wasn't like, don't do this, but it was like, interesting. And I was sharing sort of some of the takeaway throughout this week. And that was a nice follow-up conversation to explain, like, look, yes, when you look at our pictures or when you walk into our classroom, there is some diversity there. But look at all of these areas where you can see the numbers. Like, numbers don't lie. But you can see areas where we can improve and things that we can change. And we need to do this. We can't keep educating all of these kids, and I can't look them in the eye every single day and say, baby, you can be whatever you want to be. You can go out there and do whatever you want to do in this theater. This is your escape. Like, go make your dream come true. When I know, and I've seen the numbers, that unless we make some changes, that's not going to happen for them.
Right.
So,
right.
I'll say real quickly, I didn't ask anyone permission, and maybe I should have, but the reason that I didn't is because the Joy Jackson Initiative approached my organization and said, we are interested in you being a part of this beta test. And at this point, because it's beta, we're not going to charge you anything. And what is clearly a well-organized organization run by a remarkable Black woman offered free help to make my organization better. And I have done nothing to deserve that. And I would be a fool to not accept that kind of unbelievable gift.
yes.
And I think anyone would be, because this organization does not owe our organizations anything.
No, and I think that the Joy Jackson Initiative, I said this when I was sharing this on social media today, I said this needs to be required for every single arts organization, and every single arts organization needs to budget for this and pay for it, and it should be required yearly.
I was going to say that.
6 months, every 6 months. I don't know. Right? Like, we're already talking expansion, Gabby. But I'm just saying, like, I think this might be one of the most important things I think I've ever done for my organization, period.
I want to do it again with my staff sitting next to me.
Yes. Yes. And I have, I'm going back through and because we're a summer festival season, we have seasonal employees. So I'm going back through and I'm actually going to do all the financial data based on my seasonal workers and just change some of it up for us too, because I realized as I went through, I said, I'm missing an opportunity here to take a look at what's happening seasonally in a broader way. So it gave me just lots of ideas. So it was very well attuned, I feel like, to almost any organization. Any organization can do this.
Wow, all of your checks will be prepared after.
Well, it's interesting to hear all of you say this because, you know, to hear you say that, you know, any organization would be stupid not to take up, well, would be foolish. Excuse me. Let me decolonize my language here. Would be foolish not to take Gabby up on this offer, and yet.
And
I mean, the panelists that are here are not the only participants that completed the assessment. However, Gabby might not say it, but I'm not afraid to. More than half of the participants who agreed to take the assessment dropped out. They did not want to complete the work. So, you know, we're in an interesting place right now.
And here's what I'll say about that, because I wasn't, but now since we opened the door, let me here's what I'll say about that. Most of the allyship that I have encountered in the last months after doing this work and creating this assessment has been, in a word, performative. I've experienced some really beautiful work from some really wonderful people. Panelists on this right now are completely included in that, completely included. What I will say is this, that we talked to a lot of organizations, me and my managing director, who, mind you, in order for people, my managing director, Julie, in order for people to take anything that I was saying as a Black woman seriously, I had to literally invite Julie into some of these rooms because I was like, hey, when I go into some rooms, people are treating me like I'm pitching them a macaroni necklace that I made in my 3rd grade class. So I invited Julie into these meetings with me and immediately experienced a shift in the way that people spoke to me and the way that people regarded this assessment. And Julie is a white person. And that is holistically the difference between people treating me like we're pitching something that is meaningful and people treating me like I'm pitching a macaroni necklace, right? And so then on top of that, to get here and to have so many organizations sign up enthusiastically, sign all of the paperwork, because y'all know you had to do a lot of paperwork, sign all the paperwork, go to all of the orientations, be there, be involved, and then not show all the way up, I think is such a great thing, a great demonstration of what this cooling off period after the loss of life looks like, because it's cyclical. There's loss of life, there's activation, white allyship, and then it falls off.
Every time.
You know, it's every time. And I saw a meme the other day that was like, that 3 months where white people said they cared about Black people was real cute. I like that. And it's the truth, right? That's how it felt. So to have the folks who are on this panel here with us today, they had to go through some stuff. And I greatly appreciate the work you all did. And all of the people who completed the assessment, I greatly appreciate the work that you all did. All right, the time has come. The time has come for us to close. You can see down there in the chat, we put down or in the comment section, I think JJI has posted the names and the handles of all of our panelists and all of their organizations. You can check out the work. Below, you will see that there is a little scrolling screen here that talks about how you can support the work of the assessment. And you can donate to our Venmo at Joy Jackson Now. That's at Joy Jackson Now. You'll be funding all of the things that we need for this assessment to work, including things like, you know, being able to use StreamYard or being able to use our working platform that we communicate with each other on, Slack, being able to, you know, fund our data storage and things like that. The real, like, not sexy things that go into running a business and an organization and creating this assessment and making it viable and beautiful. Mandy Jo, talk to us a little bit about what BTGM is up to and how we can support you and your work.
Well, Black Theater Girl Magic actually has a lot going on right now. We just finished a play cycle called Theater Sparks about a play series about anti-racism and conversations around anti-racism for the youth of America. We are moving into a couple more projects. We have an Ask Me Anything series that we are using to discuss, any and all things in the entertainment industry, specifically to help Black, Indigenous, and people of color advance their careers. School is in session. We just created our inaugural class of the musical theater anatomy course, where we're providing 20 Black women and femmes the opportunity to study with professional musical theater creators completely for free for 8 weeks. And at the end of that, hopefully we'll be able to produce some of their works in partnership with all Black woman-led production companies like Black Bee Entertainment. We are also, we have a lot going on. So if you're interested in hearing about what Black Theater Girl Magic is doing, you can check us out at blacktheatergirlmagic.org. We have a newsletter that you can sign up for. If you want to donate, you can donate there. Speaking of donations, I don't want to go off the air before we thank our sponsors for tonight's event. Specifically, Three Hats Studios and Beth Marshall Presents are two of our sponsors. They were willing to let us thank them on air. We actually had several anonymous people who wish to remain anonymous who just wanted to help without receiving any kind of recognition. These people are sponsoring our ASL interpreters. They're sponsoring our technical support staff and the work that went into creating this town hall today. So we thank you so much for being event sponsors for this, because without you, this would not have been possible. Accessibility is a basic human right. It's a basic human need. And so if you have an event, and this is not just for our panel, this is for everyone out there, if you are having an event and you have the capabilities for doing ASL interpreting live, do it. It is a basic right. If you don't have not a penny to your name and you can't find someone to do it for you free of charge, you should at least have closed captioning. At least. Facebook does it for free. But ASL is better. ASL is always better, and it is a basic human right to be able to communicate with the world.
Yes.
So have interpreters. They're very important. Pay them for their work. So thank you so much to our interpreter team. They've done such an amazing job. Dresden and Ruby, thank you so much. You're phenomenal.
And I'd also like to give a big thank you to our panelists, Jenna Ellser from our Glow Lyric Theater, and Vanessa Knowles from the Dynamics Performance Troupe, Evan Hoffman from Next Stop Theater, and of course, Melissa Bernstein, Artistic Director of Newton Theater Company. Thank you all so very much for joining us today. And thank you to all of you out there watching this incredible conversation that we've just had. It got hot, it got warm in here. I'm so glad that we were able to have this honest dialogue about the future of theater and the future of your individual organizations. For me, JJI's work is creating the space to be able to examine our organizations on an individual level and ensure that the infrastructure and structural integrity to support BIPOC folks and keep us safe in your organizations exists. So I'm very, very pleased that you were able to see what's going on in your organization clearly and move forward.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our town hall for the live theater community, presented by the Joy Jackson Initiative and Black Theater Girl Magic. We hope you join us again next time. Bye-bye.